Foreign trade. So what is trade? Trade means buying and selling of goods and services. Capital goods, it is nothing but the machines which were used to produce one commodity, that is called as capital goods. Overall literacy level was very less, so it was only 16%. Hello everybody, I'm your Divya ma'am, Assistant Professor from Department of Commerce and Management, lecturing Pre-University College Vidhyaashram, Mysuru, the Temple of Excellence. I take this opportunity to welcome you all for the session 2 on your chapter 1, that is Indian economy on the eve of independence. So in the session 1, we have totally discussed about the colonial period and what was the economic development during colonial period, what was agriculture and in what situation agriculture was there, and we have also discussed about the industry, and we just used to export the raw materials for the foreign countries. We were not using it for our production purpose. So that was the situation. So we have totally discussed why our economy are still in developing state. So all these are the topics that we have discussed in the last class. So in today's class, we shall discuss on the topics regarding foreign trade. So during the colonial period, so in the eve of your independence, that is during the colonial period, what is the foreign trade? What was foreign trade was all about? Demographic condition, occupational structure, when we talk about the infrastructure and the conclusion. So when a country is said to be a developed country, it is always the country's infrastructure should be developed. We should have a particular state of development in our country in such a way that the education, healthcare and the other infrastructure should be easily accessed to all the people. But during the colonial period, so as I have said you all in the first session itself, so regarding the colonial period, so we are in the chapter 1 wherein we are studying the history, the background of our independence. So before independence, what was our economic development? What was our India was all about? So during the colonial period, the British rule, so how they exploited our country, the resources what we had, abundance of resources, how they have looted that. So all the background, the history we are studying, and we are in today's class we are discussing about all these topics that is very important for you all, which is with respect to the infrastructure, with respect to the foreign trade, demographic situation and the country's state of economy. So why we are still in developing state. So if you all understand the background or the history of our pre-independence and the post-independence, what was the situation, so we'll detailedly understand why we are still in developing state. Moving forward, foreign trade. So what is trade? Trade means buying and selling of goods and services. Foreign trade means what? Buying and selling goods and services cross border. Within the domestic country, it is domestic trade. So outside our domestic country, it is foreign trade. So outside our country, it is called as what? Foreign trade. So what is trade? Trade means buying and selling of goods and services. So when you cross border, when you sell the goods or buy the goods cross border to the different countries, it is called as foreign trade. So during the colonial period, that is your pre-independence and the post-independence, what was our foreign trade? What was the situation? Whether it was impacting good foreign trade for us, or what was the situation? The restrictive trade policies, what we had, the restrictive policy. Restrictive means we had restrictions with the rules and regulations of the commodity production, trade and tariff pursued by the colonial government. So the British have imposed the tariff barriers, the trade barriers. So they have imposed the policies which adversely affected our country's foreign trade. So which has adversely affected the structure, composition and the volume of India's foreign trade. So we were not much good at our foreign trade. Why? Because of during the colonial rule, the British government had imposed lot of rules, regulation, policies on our commodity production as well as the trade. So they imposed the taxes for buying and selling of goods and services. So there was no much export that we can see during the colonial period. Moving forward, India became an exporter of primary products. What are the primary products that we were exporting? Raw silk, cotton, wool, sugar, indigo, jute, etc. and an importer of finished goods. So we were exporter of the raw materials, and that raw materials were used by the other countries and they used to make them as a finished goods. But we were what? We were the importers. What is this exporting? From our country, if we are giving something we are selling the products to other country, it is export. Import means what? From other country we are buying, that is import. So export and import, hope it is clear. So we were exporting the raw materials, so the basic materials which were used in other countries for finished goods. So then we used to import the finished goods such as cotton, silk and woolen clothes and the capital goods. So what do you all mean by capital goods? It is nothing but the machines which were used to produce one commodity, that is called as capital goods. Like light machinery produced in the factories. So our foreign trade was very low because of the colonial government restrictions and the policies that they have imported. We were just exporting the raw materials such as cotton, jute and the silk, but we were importing the finished goods. So they use our resources and they make it finished goods and they are selling to our country itself. So that was the situation of foreign trade during the colonial period. Moving forward, Britain maintained a monopoly control. What is this monopoly? Monopoly means single seller, many buyer. Monopoly is a market situation. So what is this? It is a market situation. Monopoly means which explains the market situation where a single seller will be there and many buyers are there. So Britain maintained a monopoly control over India's export and import. So they were the single seller. The British mainly, they were the single seller. All the Indians were buyers. So they had a lot of control over our India's export and import. As a result, more than half of India's foreign trade was restricted to Britain. So half of many whatever products, whatever the commodity we were producing, everything was just restricted to Britain itself, not to other countries. So while the rest was allowed with few other countries like China, Ceylon, which is now called as Sri Lanka, and Persia, which is Iran now. So only for these countries we were exporting. So it was very limited and restricted because of the monopoly situation that they have created, British have created in our India. Moving forward, the most important characteristics of India's foreign trade throughout the colonial period was the generation of large export surplus. There was only export. We can see the exporting of the basic raw materials. So we can only produce those things into finished goods, but they were completely exploiting us. But this surplus came at a huge cost to the country's economy. Several essential commodities like food grains, cloth, kerosene, etc. were scarcely available in the domestic market. So what was only available here? Only essential commodities like food grains, clothes, kerosene, only these were available in our country. Furthermore, This export surplus did not result in any flow of gold or silver to India. So there was lot of resources, and what was it was there? It was there only the food grains and the basic essential commodities was there with us. But India was suffering a lot. So due to this only, we are still having a situation of poverty, unemployment. The major economic problems in today's world that we are suffering is because of the colonial rule, colonial government, what British made us, and they entirely created the monopoly in our market. So they were the single seller. They did not allow us to goods, export the products what we were giving. They restricted us only to the raw materials, the basic materials, so that they used to export, and finished goods what they prepare from the manufacture from the raw materials what we have given, that they used to sell to India itself. So due to this situation, what happened, people doesn't had employment opportunity, people doesn't had enough money to survive in the entire market. So furthermore, there was no silver or gold that were coming into our country. Moving forward, the another important concept that we all have to learn in today's class is demographic condition. Demography is related to population. So what was the situation? How was our population during the colonial rule? So people were literate or what? Census was conducted or what? So all this we'll study now. Various details about the population of British India were first collected through a census in 1881. So this is 1 mark question for you all, my dear students. Kindly note down, when was the first census that is conducted in India? That is British India, it was 1881. So through the census only, they got to know what was the population, how many people are literate. So what do you mean by literate? Literate is nothing but a person who is able to read and write is called as literate. So the person is called as literate. So that is the situation. So every 10 years such census operations was carried out. So who has brought census to our India? It was British. So once in 10 years the census were carried out. Before 1921, India was in the first stage of demographic transition. The second stage of transition began after 1921. What do you mean by transition? Transition means changes. So how gradually our population started increasing. So when we have good health facility, when we have good benefits, education, infrastructure, everything, people life expectancy will increase. What do you mean by life expectancy? A person who live for a particular year, it is called as life expectancy. So life expectancy will increase. So how many years a person can live, male and female? So they bifurcate and categorize the life expectancy rate. So in your further classes, you'll understand what is life expectancy rate. So as of now, you'll have to understand life expectancy means a person live, a male or a female live without any disease. So that is called as life expectancy. So, however, neither the total population of India nor the population growth at this stage was very high. There was no much population that you can see, because there is no proper infrastructure facility, there is no proper drinking water facilities, there is no proper toilet for them. So, all these are the reasons which caused health problems for the people who are living in the villages. Most of the people, they were living in villages during the colonial period. So, there was no categorization of urban area, rural areas. Most of the people, they depend on agriculture and they were living in villages. The overall literacy rate, as I've told you, literacy means the person one is able to read and write. So, overall literacy level was very less. So, it was only 16%. Entire population, when we compare in your census, it was only 16% people were able to read and write. So people were illiterate. Out of this, the female literacy level was negligible, low. Females were not given importance. They were used only for the household jobs. They were homemakers, wherein they used to help the farmers at their plowing and at their farming, but women education was completely nil during the colonial period. So public health facilities were either unavailable. Health facility, health benefits. Today if we go for an area to area, you can see the people come and check the BP, sugar and the basic healthcare facilities very free now, that has been given by our government. But during the colonial period, the basic facilities also were nil. Large chunks of population when available were highly inadequate. No water, airborne disease were rampant and took a huge toll in a life. So there during that period, drought were there, airborne diseases, all this. When people used to get disease, they used to put out of the house and the person used to die at the house itself, the backyard itself. So that was the situation in our country earlier. The overall mortality rate. So what is mortality rate? Death rate. Mortality rate is called as death rate. So was very high. The infant mortality, infant means small, newborn baby or a baby who is not considered as a child, a very small. Infant means small baby. So infant mortality rate was quite alarming, about 218 per thousand. Per thousand population, 218 people used to die every year. Life expectancy was also very low. Only 44 years people used to live. Only 44 years people used to live. So you can imagine the conditions, how people struggled and lived during the colonial period. So in the absence of reliable data, it is difficult to specify the extent of poverty. So there was no much available data that we can see during the colonial period. So poverty number, they couldn't predict it properly. The data was not sufficient for them to check out the poverty, but during that time there was extensive poverty. What is poverty? Poverty is a situation where people cannot achieve their basic living, that is food, clothing and shelter. When the people couldn't achieve, when they couldn't get food, clothing and shelter, then that people are considered as poverty line people, below poverty line people. So they live in that category. Moving forward, next, occupational structure. What is occupation? It is nothing but the work structure during the colonial period. So during the colonial period, the occupation structure in India, distribution of working persons across in different industries. They used to go to different industries. Why? Because our agriculture crop are seasonal. When we have season, they used to stick on to their agriculture land, but later they used to go for industries. They used to migrate from one place to another to get the job. The agriculture sector accounted for the large share of workforce, which usually remained high. 70 to 75% of population entirely depend on agriculture, few of them on manufacturing and service sector. Only 15 to 20% we can see that people used to depend on the agriculture and service sector. That too they used to migrate. So that is the situation of occupation during the colonial period in India. Next, parts of then Madras Presidency, comprising areas of present-day states of Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala and Karnataka, Bombay, Bengal, witnessed a decline in the dependency of workforce on the agriculture. So these are the states that they depended on the workforce on the agriculture sector, and later there was a slight increase in the manufacturing and the service sector. So however, there had been an increase in the share of workforce in the agriculture during the same time in different states. In different states, we can see different people coming for occupation, that is for the manufacturing and the service sector. Moving forward, next topic that we are discussing is infrastructure. So during the colonial government, Our India's infrastructure was very poor. Our economic development was very poor. Why? Because of lack of infrastructure. One of the major economic problem even today India is facing, that is poor infrastructure. Why is it happening? We have to see. So, under the colonial regime, basic infrastructure such as railways, ports, water transport, post and telegrams did develop. We can see only few of the infrastructure. Railways were there, ports were there, then water transportation we can see, telegram we can see, only posts. No, there was no email, there was no internet what we are using today. So that was the situation during the colonial period. However, the real motive behind this development was not to provide the basic amenities to the people, but to serve various colonial interests. Why all these infrastructures were there? That is railways, water transport, post, telegraphs were there just to fulfill the colonial rule. The British needed all these things to export our resources, they wanted to loot the resources, they wanted to loot the commodity products, everything to pass from one country to another country. So to colonial interest, all these things were there, but not to provide any of the basic things or the basic structure for our Indians. That was the reason why all this were there. Road constructed India prior to advent of British rule were not fit to modern transportation. The roads what they were constructed, it was not at all fitting for the modern transportation. So how they want for their basic needs, for their development, they have, how for their convenience they have taken up our infrastructure in India. The roads that were built primarily served the purpose of mobilizing the army, to mobilize the army, take care to concern about the army. They constructed the road within India and drawing out raw materials from the countryside to the nearest railway station or the ports to send these far away or to England for the other foreign destinations. Roads were constructed. Why? Because to transport the raw materials, to transport the goods to foreign countries or to the England, to Britain countries. There always remained an acute shortage of all weather roads to reach out for the rural people during the rainy seasons. There was no proper road. Even today, if you all go to the North India, the underdeveloped states, you can see this situation. There will be no proper connectivity road for the rural people to transport. So during the rainy season, during any of the rural areas, there was no proper roads that were there for the people to transport from one place to another. So naturally, therefore, people mostly living in these areas suffered a lot during the natural calamities and the famine. So when drought comes, when the flood, when all this natural calamities happens, people, especially rural people, suffered a lot because the roads were constructed only for benefiting the British. They took over the raw materials, everything they exported to other foreign countries just for their transportation purpose. But rural people were actually suffering because they didn't even provide the basic amenities for Indians and our rural people. So that is the major drawback that we had during the colonial period. The infrastructure was completely poor, which were benefiting our Indians. So the British introduced the railways in India 1850. Very important question, 1 mark. So which is very important. Contribution. The railways affected the structure of Indian economy in 2 ways. Very importantly, on the one hand, it enabled people to undertake long distance travel. They can go to different geographical areas. The cultural and the languages barriers, it went. They've migrated themselves to avail the employment opportunities. They commercialized their product, they commercialized their agriculture. One way it benefited the Indians. The other way, the volume of India's export undoubtedly expanded. So products what Indians manufacture, it exported in a large scale. This, it helps in a social benefits for the people. The inland waterways at times also proved uneconomic conditions. So it also helped the people. The waterways also helped Indians during this way. So Vasco da Gama has invented the sea route. So that helped the people to take away the waterway. So even today the fishing net what we see in Kerala, that was introduced by Portuguese. So all this have one or the other way it has benefited our Indians. The introduction of expensive system of electronic telegram in India. So they introduced what? Electronic telegram in India similarly serve the purpose of maintaining the law and order. So they introduced the electronic telegraph which were benefited the Indians. The introduction of the expensive system of electronic telegram in India similarly served the purpose of law and order. The postal service on the other hand, the public remained safe with the public communication what they can do through the postal services. So all these postal services, electronic telegraph, all these things were introduced during the colonial period. On the other hand, it also benefited the people. So finally, to conclude the class, the first chapter was all about the pre-independence and the post-independence situation of our Indian economic development. So during the colonial rule, British rule, so what was the agriculture, what was the industrial sector, how it was contributing to our GDP, so that there was no contribution for our country's development. So the entire British, they started monopoly in our country, wherein they took over the advantage of our people. So wherein we only used to export the raw materials and we used to import the finished goods from the country. So our export was only restricted, our foreign trade was only restricted to the British and the other neighboring countries, but it was not widely, it was not globalized what we are having today. So that was the situation. So we have also discussed about the infrastructure and the demographic condition, the workforce, how people used to be used, how the workforce used to used for the purpose of production. They were only stick to agriculture, only on the seasonal basis they used to go for the industries and the manufacturing and the service sector. So that too I have mentioned few of the states wherein people used to migrate for the employment opportunity. So for this purpose it caused what? It caused the poverty. So there was poor infrastructure, although on the other hand all the infrastructure what they developed during the colonial rule benefited our Indians. So that's it for today. So the chapter 1, that is your economic condition during the colonial rule, that is the eve of independence, is hope clear for you all without any doubt. So smile is the biggest jewel you can wear, people. Keep smiling. Thank you.